Welcome, everyone. CPO is happy to host a wonderful webinar based on the business impact analysis. Don't skip on the analysis. Don't just go over that word. Let's focus on that space. And to that end, we have with us Fiona, Raymond Cox, and Victor Vela. They have delivered this presentation at the Continuity Insights conference earlier this year. Thought it was so good. We got to talking and said, let's do this for CPO. Let's deliver this to CPO. So that is why we are here. And without further ado, I am going to hand over the virtual floor to Fiona and Victor. They're going to introduce themselves and take us through their presentation. Fiona.
Thank you very much, Alice. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I gather there's some new CPO members, so welcome, welcome. And well, let me just give you a little bit of introduction about me. April of this year was really a stark reminder of how long I've been working in our industry. In 1999, I was working for a large retailer with supermarkets, health and beauty stores, and the 7-Eleven franchise in Hong Kong. When I was asked to assist with developing business continuity plans for their Taiwanese supermarkets. And then in the early hours of April 21st, Taiwan suffered this devastating earthquake. And to this day, they're really unsure whether it was a 7.2 or a 7.6 earthquake. Well, fast forward to 6:30 on April the 2nd, and 25 years later, and the island was rocked by a 7.4 magnitude earthquake, causing further devastation. And so I would say the intervening years have been nothing short of fascinating. By the early 2000s, I was firmly immersed in this world of business continuity management or resiliency. I was leading PricewaterhouseCoopers business continuity practice in Hong Kong. And then I'm a Brit, if you can't tell. In 2004, I moved to the US. After about 3 years, I was headhunted to go and work for Marsh, which is the big insurance brokers. 14 years ago, I founded Raymond Cox Consulting as a boutique business continuity and emergency planning firm based out of San Francisco. So that's where I am today, along with Victor, and I've not looked back in this time. So talking of giving back, I'm a great believer in giving back to the community, and I regularly contribute to the improvement of industry standards and guidelines. I serve as a technical expert on ISO Technical Committee 292, which is the committee that's focused on security and resilience. For my sins, I'm leading the project to revise one of the technical specifications. I was a contributor to the BCI Good Practice Guidelines that got launched last year, or published last year, around this time, in fact. And I've served as the president of Burma, which is a Bay Area organization focused on business resiliency, not dissimilar to CPO. And that's really where I found an allegiance with Alice, because she was the president of CPO as I was a president of Burma. Anyway, today I serve on the board of the California Resiliency Alliance. And enough about me. Victor, let me hand off to you.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Victor Vela. And let me first say that Fiona and I are both based out of San Francisco, California. So that might help the context of some of the things we might be talking about with regards to our backgrounds. So I guess you could say that it was situational awareness that led me to business continuity. That and a combination of my background in technology kind of led me here. So one of the responsibilities I had in my first real job was to drive a set of nightly AS400 backup tapes to ComDisco in Santa Ana. This is when I was living in Southern California. And we would test to see if we could bring up our systems there. And, you know, this was essentially our DR plan. We'd log in, run some reports, and if things look good, you know, we'd considered it a success. But, you know, that always kind of bothered me. You know, I was never really satisfied when we did those exercises. And because I remember thinking, you know, is this really how things are going to work? And, you know, what happens next, you know, after we bring up the system? Well, fortunately, nothing bad ever happened. So, you know, that was good, but it would always just kind of nag me. Well, fast forward to when I was at Charles Schwab ensuring changes to systems at the data center were successfully implemented. It turned out that I was working right next to some business continuity staff. And I happened to notice, you know, I would hear their conversations and I noticed that they were having much more interesting conversations than the conversations I was having. And, you know, this is that situational awareness I mentioned. And, you know, in a little bit, Fiona's going to refer to it as eavesdropping. But, you know, we were all in cubicles. So I kind of, you know, I think we were all meant to hear each other. It's kind of funny. Anyway, as I learned more about, you know, what they did, I volunteered to draft the first business continuity plan for my department. And then learning more about what that was all about got me interested in the field of business continuity. So I also realized as I was going on this little journey that, you know, what was really bothering me about those exercises that I would do in Santa Ana. You know, it's not just about bringing up the systems. There's a whole world of, you know, business recovery associated with it that was missing. Well, I obtained my CBCP certification, and with my degree in computer science, I've had opportunities to work on some interesting projects. So I've led the business continuity effort in very regulated environments, you know, like financial services and pharmaceutical companies, and that really taught me a lot. Over the years, I did notice that I enjoyed setting things up and getting a program on its feet. And so I recognized that maybe consulting would be a good fit for me. I especially enjoy projects where we design and conduct a business impact analysis, and it's definitely the analysis that kind of gets me excited. Well, I hope this gives you an idea of who we are, so let's dive into the real reason you're here.
Okay, so as you likely well know, if you've been working in business continuity, the business impact analysis is geared to identifying when a particular business or when particular business activities need to be recovered, and also establishing when and what resources will be needed at time of disruption. And if you've performed the business impact analysis, I think we can generally all agree we work with somebody in the given department that can talk about the business activities that their department or business unit performs. And in our evaluations of client programs, we often see three areas where the BIA runs into difficulties. Let me just stop before I go on. Victor, if you just go back 1 second. We had got a Slido QR code. If you want to ask any questions while we're going through the presentation, feel free to just use your smart device and point it at that QR code. We'll include it later, but just if you have questions as you go along, then we can make sure we can answer them. So let me just go on. You know, I was saying there's sort of three areas. Well, the first is it's pretty apparent that other parts of the organization weren't taken into account. I know this is a bad thing to say, but departments can be very myopic. They don't really consider the impact between business activities. They're really only seemingly focused on their own work. And this is the opposite of what Victor was saying when he was talking about eavesdropping on the conversations around him. And what's happening is that the folk that are being interviewed have a tendency to work in silos. And we see this regularly. And what happens is that the information gathered then becomes disjointed, which may ultimately cause conflict. It could be that the questions that are being posed in the business impact analysis were asked from the perspective of the department's business activities only, and probably need to be broadened. So another difficulty, Victor, if you want to move the slide on.
Oh, I did. Are you guys seeing it?
Now it's come up. Okay. So another difficulty is that there's no assurance that another department's actually going to be available to support a business activity when needed during an actual disruption. And this is because the reliance from one department to another and one business activity to another hasn't really been clearly articulated. So then the third challenge is obtaining, I think there's a sort of maybe a slight lag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The third challenge that we're seeing is that of obtaining top management sign-off of the consolidated business impact analysis data. Remember when they just used to make changes to the business activity recovery time objectives, which frankly seemed arbitrary? Well, now what we're seeing is that they simply aren't willing to sign off when they don't agree. And that's what's given us pause and brought us here today. So.
Well, it all comes down to the simple equation. Achieving a successful recovery from a disruption requires an honest understanding of the recovery activities your organization is capable of, which the BIA should reveal, along with an understanding of what's missing and how to prioritize and resolve those gaps. Without this, you won't have confidence in and thus be able to vouch for your recovery capabilities. So we found that this is the key that drives the usefulness of the timeframes that people are saying they need to be up and running in the BIA and the availability of resources during a disruption. Before we cover how we've been able to smooth out the rough spots that Fiona mentioned, let's first share a few assumptions that we'll be making regarding what we see with most BIA efforts we run into with our clients.
Well, the foundation, we believe, to a good business impact analysis is that it should be done at the business activity level. So what we've done is, for the purposes of today, our client company is called Viofan Pharmaceuticals, and they're a global company headquartered out of Boston, Massachusetts. And when we look at the org chart that we're seeing here, we agree with the client the list of departments and sub-departments that we're going to interview and identify the department representatives. We then work with those department representatives to identify their business activities. And, you know, what we typically do is we start with having a conversation during which we ask them to think about a verb like, we manage X, we capture Y, we perform Z. And that starts to help them think about what it is they do. For instance, when we're meeting with the business continuity folk, they tell us we send emergency notification messages using the emergency notification system. Or, you know, when we're having a conversation with facilities and real estate ops, one of the business activities they tell us they do is that we manage workplace services. And for each business activity that we capture, we get narrative to describe what it is that they're actually doing. So when somebody says, oh, what does that mean? We can actually articulate what the business activity does. And that helps when determining dependencies between one department and another. And I'm just going to pause and say something here is, you would be surprised at the number of clients that we have that we gather information about, or they name a business activity, but when you talk to another department, they don't really understand what it is. So getting that narrative really does help. Anyway, once we have the list of business activities, we find out the point at which the business activity must be up and running. We'll take finance as our example. And here what you can see is, among the business activities that they perform, accounts payable has a 14-day recovery time objective, while the treasury function has a 72-hour recovery time objective. Now, if you perform the BIA at the department level, it will appear as if everybody in finance must be back up and running within 72 hours, and that's simply, it's not the case. Not all resources need to be available for everyone in a department simultaneously. So business activities will have different recovery times, which then effectively allows you to stagger the resources that would be needed accordingly. So looking at this slide, only 3 out of the 10 business activities are needed within 24 hours. But that gives you time to put in longer solutions for the business activities that can be resumed later.
So we're also acknowledging that most BIAs are already doing a good job of gathering information about the standard resources like buildings, equipment, technology, support staff, and third-party vendors. For these resources, we gather information about each activity's needs, what they need to perform their work. So for example, with buildings, we want to know how many people are reliant on a specific location for them to perform the work that supports each separate business activity. As Fiona mentioned, we think it's really important to conduct your BIA at the business activity level. Similarly, for the equipment, we capture any special equipment needs beyond the baseline supplies provided to employees and whether there are any special machinery or printers required. Again, at the business activity level is, where we prefer to have this captured, and because it's so useful at that level. Now, one area that most BIAs do particularly well is gathering the technology needs of the business. And, it's probably because IT is worrying about this very same thing as well. And HR systems are doing a good job of pulling in relevant information about department staff. And then again, we just think that it's important to stress that capturing and identifying support staff requirements at the business activity level is the key.
When we look at this last picture with the trucks, it sort of refers to supply chain. And I mentioned that, or third parties, and I mentioned that I'm working with ISO on revisions to one of the technical specifications. And specifically, we're looking at recovery strategies and solutions. And one of the things that we're talking about is that it's simply not that a vendor is unavailable that would normally provide a product or service, but it's actually doing a deeper dive to understand what raw materials are needed. And if you think back to the deep COVID days and the disruptions to the supply chain and the issues of getting product into the US or globally, to be honest, identifying those raw materials is not a bad idea, and it's something that will be reflected in the new specification. But I also think you may want to consider adding this data point into your own business impact analysis. So if you're in the process of making some changes, have that in the back of your mind. It could be something that's useful down the road. I think it's fair to say that when we look at the screen and think about the resources that BIAs capture, we're getting some pretty good data points regarding these resources.
Our final assumption has to do with something we see a lot with our clients. They have plans to someday collect upstream and downstream dependencies, especially if they use a business continuity planning system, because all of them are marketing that ability to leverage these dependencies. But for some reason, our clients seem to put this off. It may be that they have more important things to do first, or maybe they realize the dependency diagrams these systems generate are too complicated and they find it difficult to leverage them. Whatever the reason, I've heard a lot of people say that it's something they want to do one of these days. But what we're proposing is that there's a big payoff if you do it now instead of waiting until later. In fact, we found that it can help smooth out the rough spots that Fiona brought up earlier. So this is what we want to share with you today. But first, let's take a quick poll. So as this renders, here we go. We're using Slido. Hopefully you've used it before, but if not, just kind of point your mobile device to this QR code, and it'll bring up a URL, a web page that has, all of the polls. There's only 2 of them that we have. Oh, thank you for answering. This is great. So, just drag your answer to the top or select your answer, whatever works on your device. And let me go ahead and get the question out so everybody understands the context. So we want to look at how many of you are capturing department interdependencies as part of your BIA. So do you capture them manually without a BCM tool? Or maybe you're using a BCM tool and capturing them that way? Or, maybe you're not capturing upstream and downstream dependencies at all. So go ahead and let us know. And Slido will organize this so that the most popular answer is on top. So this is excellent. So we'll give everybody a little bit of time to answer and see if you guys settle on one answer or if there's a race between a couple. So it looks like most people are capturing them. I think all people are. That's good. And then probably not using a BCM tool seems to be the most popular, but some people are using a BCM tool. We have 9 answers, so it's a little bit of a split there. So excellent. And then one other thing I just want to add about the Slido page on your mobile device is there's kind of 2 tabs in the blue bar at the top. Right now, you're probably on the active poll. On the left is a Q&A section. So if you have a question that you think of, you can just tab over there and add a question, and we'll get to that at the end of our presentation. We'll have time for those. Well, good. So 10 of you have answered, and it looks like you're capturing them. Everybody's capturing them. Most people are capturing them without a BCM tool. So you'll see some good hints in our presentation today that hopefully can help you. And even if you're using a tool, you know, kind of, you all have the capability to manipulate and modify, you know, the reporting in those tools. So hopefully that, you know, what we're sharing today will help you kind of navigate through what's the out of the box behavior of your tool, and maybe you can customize it a little bit. All right. Well, Fiona's going to go over something else we've noticed lately that has to do with top management sign-off. So I'll click on to the next slide. Thank you for answering these questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, historically, top management just would simply sign off on the BIA data. But what we found is that their pushback is coming to the fore. And we've seen this with a number of our clients as we've been building out their business continuity programs from the ground up. And now they seem to need supporting confirmation that the recovery time objectives that you're gathering, or we're gathering, are valid. They may know something's wrong, but they can't articulate exactly what it should be. So this is our second poll that we're going to ask. Here is the question. Again, just, you know, point and shoot your device at the QR code, or bring back up the one that's already open on your mobile device. So let's just see what happens in your organization when you respond to this question. What does top management do when asked to approve the business activity recovery time objectives? Do they agree with the information that you've captured? Do they override them when they, particularly for those ones that they disagree with? Or actually, do they disagree but aren't comfortable overriding them, or something else? So again, let's see if we can get, you know, the people that responded before at least to give us some data points, because I think it's useful to understand what's going on in this situation. You know, as I say, historically, they just used to either agree it or they would override them. And so now we're seeing something a little bit different. And, you know, while we're sort of waiting for a couple more people to respond, I would just say that, you know, when you're looking at the involved in trying to have a conversation about the activity RTOs, it's important that top management is engaged in these conversations. So maybe we're not getting any more responses, Victor. So
Yep.
Looks like most people agree with them. Well, that's good. Let's see, let's carry on, because I think we're going to give you some more information. All right, well, I'm just going to say in our what we were finding is that when they disagree and are unwilling to provide RTO changes, we found ourselves having to get creative. There was a light bulb moment when we were faced with supporting a COO who inherently didn't feel the RTOs in his organization were aligned. And that got us thinking. We knew we'd captured some good data in the BIA, both dependency information it was dependency information at that business activity level. And because of that, we realized we had some really powerful data points that we could use to confirm the recovery time objective values between dependent business activities. So we would suggest, here's our proposition. When you are sitting down with those subject matter experts during a BIA interview and you're discussing the business activities, that you say, I have one more question, and that's around dependencies. Get the information up front and then eliminate that pushback from management later. We want to share the method that we've used to address the issues that have been coming up around the BIA being done in silos, the uncertainty about whether the support will be available when we need it. And by support, I'm going to include resources as well, and management's pushback. And it's really at the end of the day about gathering the right data and identifying upstream and downstream dependencies, recovery time objectives, dependency gaps, and then resolving those gaps until you're satisfied they've been addressed, and then can be presented to top management in a meaningful way.
So when starting a BIA, chances are there's a lot of good data that's being gathered about each department and their resource needs. For the business impact analysis at Viofan, Mira, the business continuity manager, is conducting a BIA and is interviewing Jocelyn, the procurement manager, and her team. They've identified the first business activity, which is ordering, and are doing a great job of gathering all the information about those standard resources that I mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at the screen that they're working on. So this is where they're capturing the workspace, equipment, technology, staffing, and third-party needs of the ordering business activity that procurement is responsible for. But as Fiona proposed, it's also where Mira has an opportunity to gather just a bit more information from Jocelyn and her team. So let me show you how. Here's where they can capture which other business activities Jocelyn relies on in order to perform the ordering activity, which are the upstream dependencies, along with the business activities that rely on ordering so that they can perform their work, and those would be the downstream dependencies. So you'll see there's this dependency description field for both of them. So Mira's, very diligent about also capturing that description of the dependency. This will help provide some context so people looking at this information later understand what Jocelyn was thinking when she identified the dependency. I sometimes describe this as a note to your future self, because even Jocelyn, maybe in a year as she reads this, she'll go, well, gosh, what was going on? And it's very helpful to have that context. So once all of Viofan's in-scope departments have been interviewed, the data is presented to in what we have here as a BIA report. For each department, we include data about each business activity, which is such as the activity description, the RTOs, and the justification of those RTOs. And we're going to see how all this data becomes very useful in a little bit. But back to my analysis, pension for that. This is where I think the fun starts, because this is just the beginning. So let's think about the A in BIA for a minute. Okay, so when we conduct a BIA, we're not just assembling or accumulating or aggregating or assessing information, right? We should be doing more than just gathering data. The A in BIA stands for analysis. It's not just about gathering the right information. We can do so much more. And that's why we said you shouldn't skimp on this analysis step. Investing more time at this point will have a big payoff.
I think Victor brought this up a little bit more earlier. Most business continuity management systems will generate a dependency map, something like this, which in our mind isn't very useful. what happens is that determining the data that you need becomes overwhelming and results in these diagrams being seldom used. And it's really a problem. So what we did is we started including dependency tables like this one that Victor's going to show you now. And these tables were included in our reports to clearly show the dependencies for each business activity, which clients really liked. And we'll be covering some examples of how this works in a minute. From the BIA data, we actually create a specific upstream and downstream report that brings in the recovery time objectives of each business activity, along with the description of the business activity and the justification for the RTO. And then this report gives us an opportunity to identify and analyze dependency timing issues in much more detail and with solid information on what was gathered in the business impact analysis. So here, if we look at this table, let's look at the first dependency between the business continuity emergency notification business activity. Victor's noting with his cursor that it's got a less than 1 hour recovery time objective. And then if you look to the left-hand side, which is the upstream dependencies, there's the HR hiring and terminations business activity. And you can see that that has a 24-hour recovery time objective. It's noted in red because it is a gap between the business continuity activity and the HR hiring and terminations activity on which there's a dependency. So in this instance, and for this gap, Emily, who's responsible for the emergency notifications business activities, meeting with Daniel, who's the HR hiring and terminations manager, to determine how they're going to address the gap. So they have 3 options. They can either, one, accept the gap and then they document their agreement. That's really important. Or they adjust the recovery time objective of the HR hiring and terminations activity, or thirdly, they adjust the recovery time objective for the business continuity emergency notification business activity. So, they're having a conversation, and in their discussion, they decide that there really is no gap because changes to the HR contact information database at Viofan don't occur that often. So it's agreed that the gap is accepted, and see what's happened. It didn't change the red text, so we know there's a gap, but there's a note that it's accepted, and we'll talk about that as well.
So looking at another example from the upstream and downstream dependencies report, here we see the dependencies for each of the business activities in HR. So this is the column in the middle where HR is, where the HR business activities are listed with their RTOs. And then the upstream dependencies are here with HR hiring and terminations and finance treasury. And we see one gap because, the red text kind of highlights that, the payroll, HR payroll business activity, which needs to be up at 24 hours, is reliant on something that's saying that it can wait 72 hours before it needs to be up. So that's why that's highlighted in red again. So with this table, you can see how it makes it very easy for the representatives from these business activities to, in this meeting, to, have that conversation about resolving the gap. So what they do is during the conversation, Lance, the finance treasurer, had actually overlooked the need to fund payroll within 24 hours. He just wasn't thinking about it when he was conducting his BIA. So because payroll is such an important activity, I hope all of you agree, Lance really needs to adjust the finance treasury RTO from 72 hours to 24 hours to align with payroll's need. So they also make sure to, review any of their justification text for their RTOs to make sure that, anything, that was documented initially is updated and aligns with this new change. So I'll go ahead and apply that change. You'll see that it goes to 24 hours and it's no longer red because there's not a gap anymore. So the analysis done by the team resolves the gap, right? Which makes Ricky, the payroll manager, very happy.
I'm going to give you one more example of how this all works. And in this instance, you see the upstream and downstream dependencies report will identify, there's a bit more going on with procurement. There are gaps with both the upstream dependencies on the left and then one of the downstream dependencies on the right. And what happens is when Lorna in procurement was being interviewed for her business impact analysis, she identified that the ordering business activity should have this 7-day recovery time objective. She also identified these two upstream dependencies. So in this instance, and particularly in this meeting there with finance, legal and facilities, Lorna recognizes that the 7-day recovery time objective may have been too aggressive because stock levels weren't taken into account. Because of this, and through the conversation, Lorna's okay to extend the recovery time objective of her ordering business activity to 14 days. And watch what happens to the two upstream dependencies. You'll see that those resolve those upstream gaps, and then the text becomes black and has solved that issue. But what's happened, if you look at the downstream dependencies, the gap now between the facilities operations business activity has increased. Oscar, who's responsible for the facilities operations business activity, set a recovery time objective of 24 hours during his interview for the business impact analysis, because what he was thinking is, oh my gosh, at time of disruption, I'm going to have to order some things. But through this dialogue and in this meeting, Lorna brings up the fact that she maintains really healthy stock levels. So facilities operations can wait 14 days to order even during a disruption. And so what you'll see now is, again, the gap has been accepted. The text will come up and it still stays. It reflects that there's a gap because the time frame remains red, but there's this note that it's been accepted.
So these three examples show you, well, really illustrate, the process. And what we want to say at this point is that applying these changes, we need to update that upstream and downstream dependency report with these revised recovery time objective values from the 3 meetings, and any accepted gaps and agreements about those accepted gaps as well. So, going through this process, because you might be changing a recovery time objective for a business activity that may have other dependencies that were aligned, that alignment may create a new gap. And so because of this, you'll need to repeat this process of reviewing this report after these changes and, identifying any new gaps if there are any and working through them. So this iterative process, is something you'll have to go through until you're satisfied that all the gaps are manageable. But this technique, hopefully, I think you'll see, it ensures that the RTO values have been reviewed from the perspective of, the other business activities that rely on them. We now have, more confidence in both the dependencies identified in the RTO timeframes and the BIA.
Yeah, and as mentioned, the tables that we've shown you have been very well received by clients, but I'm going to be transparent and say tracking these changes manually is cumbersome. So it goes back to that poll that we took earlier. It seems that quite a lot of you do not have a tool. So I just wanted to reflect that, we acknowledge it can be time consuming. So what we've done is we are leveraging automation to generate our report. And there's no denying that it's been a big time saver. That's regardless of whether it's manual or you're automating the reports, that there's really no getting around the fact that the changes can have impact on other dependencies, which in turn can create new gaps, as Victor rightly said. We would always recommend repeating the process until all gaps have been resolved or are noted as acceptable. And again, picking up on what Victor said, it's so important to capture the narrative around why a gap has been accepted, because if you go back in 2 days' time or a month's time, somebody won't remember why it was agreed that the gap was acceptable.
Yeah, that's so true. We hope you agree that going through this process can help smooth out the rough spots in the BIA, and ultimately can improve your ability to recover, because the timeframes you're planning for are now based on information that is broadly agreed on by everyone. Along with providing more confidence in successfully recovering from a disruption, it has 3 specific benefits. Having multiple eyes on the BIA data fosters agreement and negates a single person's BIA response. Here you can see Emily from the Business Continuity Department in the white shirt is very pleased that the group is reaching a consensus. It can also help minimize surprises when one department is relying on another department during a disruption. You don't want to be in a situation like this where these 2 gentlemen are clearly unprepared when a dependency they have on another business activity is not working out as they had expected. Finally, top management knows there's been a detailed vetting process when they review the BIA. Going through this process, you now have empirical data that can be leveraged to help you get top management approval. And here at Viofan, senior leadership is able to sign off on the BIA with confidence. So we want to thank you for letting us take you on this journey today. We're open to any questions you might have. Here's the QR code again, or if it's on your mobile device, and we'll here in just a second go to that page that'll show the questions you guys have already submitted. So thank you very much. But one other thing we want to share is our contact information. So here it is here on this next slide. So if you think of something later, feel free to reach out to Fiona or myself. Phone and email is here. And if you want to write us a letter, that would be great too. There's our address. Thank you. But we're always happy to help. So, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. Okay, so here's our audience poll. And so I don't see any questions right now, which is fine, and we can take questions, in real time, verbally. Happy to do that as well.
Yeah, in fact, and thank you both so much for taking us through very important part of doing the BIA, which, like you said, it's the analysis and really teasing out where those dependencies are and making sure that it all aligns, because it does make a difference. I see Zach has a question. I was just going to say he's using what I was going to recommend. Let's use the raise your hand feature if you'd like to ask a question. So Zach.
Perfect.
All right. Yeah, thanks for giving me the floor here. So I just have a basic, I guess, a fundamental approach question. So at Nationwide, we've kind of taken a step back, I'd say, from we're a NIST-based company, so we typically use the 800-34 in order to build out our contingency plans and BIA work. However, our organization has recently aligned itself more to the NIST CSF, which is the cybersecurity framework, which has a very different lens, because from a BCM perspective, we focus on viability of the company, where CSF, that's more of like a customer reputation, protect from cyber type stuff. To me, that's 2 very different lenses. And I think the abandonment of the 834 is kind of just a mistake. But I kind of want to get your guys' thoughts and opinions on that.
Well, We were actually working with a retailer earlier in the year and using NIST, and it's different. There's no getting around it, and they wanted to keep it pretty aligned. They wanted their plans to look pretty aligned with what NIST was saying, and it was really around the cyber requirements. And we found ourselves having to bake in whole other areas that we felt had been overlooked. It just wasn't really sitting well with us. So we had to get, I think we had to get creative in that situation as well. Ultimately, their plans, we helped develop a template that they could use, but it was bringing in, we definitely did it with the lens of business continuity management overlaid on top of the cyber lens that NIST has.
Yeah.
Victor, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that it's really, Zach, I think, up to you, but I would recommend looking at some sort of a blend, something that satisfies NIST completely, but also something that you can overlay what in your mind would be missing, right? The perspective of, the business as well. And I think that's, it doesn't, just because you're aligning to NIST doesn't preclude you from doing a little bit more. And so I think that might be, just a sensible approach to kind of make sure. And you probably have a lot of that data anyway, if you're going from one to the other, so don't abandon that data, refresh it, keep it alive. And then, again, make sure you're following all of the NIST requirements that you need to, but, don't let go of that other data that you've been nurturing all this time. I think it's of value. That's what I would say.
Good advice. Thanks.
Yeah,
All
sure.
right.
And we have a question on the chat. I think Liz had a question. I'll read it. Or Liz, if you want to go ahead, it's up to you.
Yeah, sure, I'll go ahead. So if you don't have a tool, if you wanted to, let me turn my background off. That's for something. If you wanted to do a similar approach, do you have any workaround suggestions, Microsoft Forms or anything like that? Or do you suggest starting with an interview?
I think, so there's a couple of things. It's probably, the collection of where you're gathering all that information. I'm kind of a spreadsheet person, so I always kind of throw it in a cell and then, figure out, where it's going to live ultimately for, depending on the purpose. Like, so for reporting, it's easy to kind of get it from Excel to Word and make it look pretty. But for this, what we wound up doing is, kind of taking it into a database. And so, we really found that gave us the best of both worlds, where we have the data cleanly identified, and then we can kind of generate reports from that database. So we just kind of, hacked out our own internal, tool to, just house the data and report out on it, in that iterative cycle. We could do that much more quickly than using those. We were using those tables, and I think they were Excel or Word, and that was really, really, really tough, especially as changes happened, to kind of track, like, okay, now we made this change to an RTO and the business process. What other areas did that impact with the dependency? It was really just overwhelming.
Yeah, I know Sam's got his hand up, but I'd love to add to the answer to this question. So let's just ask Sam what his question was, and then maybe I'll come back and talk about the simplicity of the tables that we were originally including versus now what we're doing. So Sam, why don't you come off mute and ask your question, and then maybe I can talk about it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for this presentation. It's been great. My question is regarding conducting the BIAs at the business activity level. And I guess one example to kind of throw at you guys is when you meet with, say, a data org and they say, hey, we have a data admin team, data warehousing team, and a data platform team. When you go to conduct the BIA interviews or the BIA questionnaires, do you do essentially one BIA questionnaire for each of those teams? Or would you say, hey, now that we have this team in the interview, what are the key activities or processes that each team does, and then do a BIA questionnaire for each of those activities?
Yeah, what a great question. So I think the most important thing is when we said that we start with meeting the client and looking at their org chart and identifying the departments and sub-departments.
Yeah.
And really it's through that conversation that we have with our clients to up front to say, how granular do we want to be? So it could be that we ultimately gather the information. We might end up with, if we're going to end up with a different business continuity plan for one group because they're so disparate from the other group, then we're probably going to have an interview with that one group, and we'll go through those questions. Like I said, we ask a verb and we say, what is it you do? We'll start asking that one group. Now, and then we would go and ask another group. If we end up finding a situation where the reporting structure is such that everybody's going to be basically, if something happens, the decision maker for a department that oversees multiple different areas of the business, if ultimately that's the decision maker, we may end up still talking to people separately, but maybe not as at a sort of such a granular level.
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
idea is that one ultimately, here's how to think about it. Is your plan going to cover all the data mining guys and the data processing guys, or however you break down your organization? Are you still want to ultimately get what it is they do at the activity level? Because the different teams or the different things they do, going back to that verb, I manage this, I perform X, I capture Y, want to identify those, we want to get the recovery time objectives. But nor do we want to go to HR's perfect example of where they talk about, we post a job, we go through an interview process.
Way too granular on that.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
We're like, no. Give us, we're going to do this. You hire. And in that hiring, in the description, describe what it is you're covering.
Okay.
Because
And
it's
Sam,
probably going to be the same people.
Yeah. And
Thanks.
Sam, one thing I would just add is that it really boils down to how similar are the objectives of each of those three teams, right?
Yeah.
So they may all be kind of rowing on the same team with the objective of, their parent department. And so it may be very easy that they have one piece, a separate piece of kind of an end-to-end process for that department that would fit in one business impact analysis, and each one has a couple of activities. Or they may be extremely different and disparate, and they each have a very important, unique kind of set of end-to-end procedures that they're responsible for. So that's kind of something else you need to tease out as well. But that granularity is the key. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Just kind of working through and just speaking with them and learning more about their processes, I think, and then making a determination after they get into a little bit more detail. Because if they all have different dependencies and systems that you use, that might justify a BIA questionnaire for each one. Whereas if they all use the same stuff and do the same thing essentially, then you can just do one questionnaire. So okay. Wonderful.
Yeah. I think it's really key. Not everybody's perfect. When we go in, we in our proposals that we write, before we even price it all out, is we ask how many departments we're going to meet with, and sometimes that's a challenge to sort of get a finance list or correct list, and we start an engagement, and then it changes. And it can change drastically. So, but it is good to have that conversation up front. So I hope that helps as well.
It does. Yeah. Thank you both.
Maybe I just, I don't know if there's any other questions, Victor, that have come in
Nope.
on Slido. No, let me just quickly go back to Liz's question, and I think I'd like to expand upon that. Is the table that we showed you was in our BIA report. It was very, very simple, and it's super clean and tidy. And for each, we would identify it by department and all their business activities, and we'd look at the upstream and downstream dependencies and so forth. In our report, in a different part of the report, we would capture the narrative, or we would identify the narrative around the business activity, what it means. So we didn't need to include that information in the simple table. By automating it in the reports now, we are putting more information about on what date the gap was accepted, who accepted it, and the reason why. It, you know, when we did this presentation at the Continuity Insights, we were in a room. It was quite full. I think Alice was at the back, and she said, "Well, I can't see what you're showing." So we stripped out the examples of what our reports look like and kept it very simple, because everybody's going to come up with their own reports. I think the key is, if you're accepting a gap, you need to record why you're accepting it, because when you go and present the information to management, they want that assurance that we're going to be able to get the business up and running, and we've had those conversations with the people we rely on for data. So they're not going to push back on that information if there's justification and they can see why. So I just wanted to call that out. But it definitely made things, it's improved the data points, because here's what we're saying is, people have these fancy systems and they're producing these great dependency maps, but because they're so overwhelming, people don't go and analyze that data. And seeing Alice nodding her head, and so the reality is that when something happens and those two people were fighting at the end and saying, pulling their hair out and saying, "Oh my gosh, we haven't got the, they're not available when we needed them," it's because they haven't had the conversations. So, any other questions? I know we're coming up on time.
Yeah. Don't see any other hands raised.
If no one has any more, I might ask one more quick question regarding this assessing impacts for financial, operational, regulatory impacts, things of that nature. When asking people how they what the impact would be, are you asking that at their RTO timeframe or their MTD timeframe?
MTD.
That's what I want to make sure. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so for those that aren't aware, MTD is maximum tolerable period of disruption, sometimes MTPD. And we kept this presentation pretty simple, because we won't explain how to do a BIA in gathering every data point. We were looking at it more from the analysis. But when we sit down with our clients, what we do is we start by identifying those different dimensions upon which we're going to gather the data, and we do it by MTPD, and out of that we actually define criteria, so against which if something reaches high, the recovery time objective, it may be that one dimension, like financial or operational or reputation, you never want it to get to a 3, level 3. And so, and the level 3, and so from that we analyze and make sure that recovery, well, because you're looking at all sorts of different dimensions, you have to see which one is going to drive the ultimate RTO. But the RTO should be based on having that information.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, understood. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. This is been a great conversation, and I can tell that everyone's taken lots of nuggets away, which is the whole purpose of doing this, right?
Yeah.
So thank
Perfect.
you so much for sharing with us today. Thank you, CPO, for joining. And if you want to, if you're new to hearing about CPO, please check us out on our website. If you have questions, I'm currently the treasurer. This is Alice Coultermark, by the way, those that don't know who I am. And I've also got several of our other council members are on the call. But please do reach out to us, and I'll just put in the chat our website is CPI.
When's your
CPO.
next meeting? When's your next meeting?
Well, we don't have that booked on the calendar yet, but I do have speakers in the pipeline. So I've got lined up for first quarter next year. We have Margaret Millett, Jason Haas, and Stuart Murray are going to be joining us in sessions similar to this. Topics obviously will be different, but we'll be hosting webinars to get that together. And then we have yet to set our date for our next summit in 2025, but we will be having an in-person event. If not before, definitely somewhere around probably the September timeframe, depending on how we work out all the schedules. So stay tuned. We'll be letting you know. In the interim, though, we have sent some emails out to members asking some questions. We will be doing elections for our council seats, and please keep an eye on your email. There's been some questions that have been posed. Do want to see your feedback so we can turn around and get those elections in motion for our officer positions. So thank you all very much for joining us. Watch your emails for more information about CPO. And like I said, any questions, a lot of us have put our LinkedIn information in the chat. Be sure to grab that. And this recording will be made available on our website when I get around to downloading it, putting it on our YouTube channel, and getting the link out there for folks. But this recording will be available. Any other comments to the council? Fiona, Victor, any closing comments?
I'd love to just say thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure to meet you, to talk to you, and feel free anytime to reach out. We're here and happy to chat.
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
have a great rest of your day.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.